The cold was a predator. It stalked Samuel Sam Jones through the skeletal alleys of the city, a relentless hunter with teeth of ice. It gnawed at the frayed edges of his army surplus jacket, crept through the holes in his worn-out boots, and settled deep in his bones, a permanent resident in the hollowed-out structure of his life. Mornings were the worst. Waking was not a gentle transition from sleep, but a violent re-entry into a world that had long since forgotten him. He would peel his back from a piece of cardboard laid over a steam grate, the brief illusory warmth of the night replaced by the damp, biting reality of dawn. His world had shrunk to this: the search for warmth, the hunt for a meal, the desperate, unending effort to remain invisible. Sam had once commanded respect. His shoulders, now perpetually hunched against the wind and the world's indifference, had once been straight and broad, squared with the pride of a soldier serving his country. Sergeant Jones. The name felt like a relic from another man's life, a ghost that whispered to him in the lonely hours between midnight and sunrise. He carried the remnants of that life in a tattered backpack, a faded photograph of his platoon, dog tags carefully wrapped in a cloth to keep them from clinking, and a small worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, its pages soft and flimsy from years of rereading. These were the anchors to a self he no longer recognized. His reflection in the grimy windows of shuttered storefronts showed a stranger, a man in his late 40s with a face that looked a decade older, etched with the cartography of hardship. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, held a permanent storm in their depths, the kind of look men get when they've seen too much and have no one to tell. The city was a cacophony of triggers. A car backfiring would send a jolt of pure adrenaline through his veins, his hand instinctively twitching, his senses screaming incoming. The roar of a helicopter overhead wasn't just city noise. It was the thumping heartbeat of a Black Hawk, rotors slicing through hot, dusty air, the smell of sand and cordite suddenly real enough to taste. He'd close his eyes, breathe through his teeth, and force the desert back into its cage. But the cage was weak, and the ghosts were strong. One afternoon, driven by a gnawing hunger that had become his constant companion, Sam was making his usual looping trek toward the downtown soup kitchen. His route, born of habit and a veteran's instinct for strategic movement, took him past a part of town he usually avoided. There, on the corner of an otherwise gentrifying block, stood the husk of the Veterans Community Hall. Weeds grew like tumors from cracks in the pavement. The windows were boarded up, scarred with graffiti. A large faded sign hung crookedly, its promise of community camaraderie support, a cruel joke against the building's skeletal reality. A new, sterile sign had been stapled over it. Property of Oakfield Development Group. Demolition scheduled. Sam stopped, the cold and hunger momentarily forgotten. He could still remember the warmth inside that building. After his first tour, before everything had unraveled, he'd spent a few evenings there. He remembered the smell of stale coffee and cheap cigars, the sound of gruff laughter, the unspoken understanding in the eyes of the older vets from Vietnam and Korea. They didn't ask questions. They just nodded, poured you a coffee, and let you be. It was a sanctuary, a place where the noise of the civilian world faded and you could, for a few hours, feel like you weren't alone. Now it was just another casualty, another piece of his past slated to be erased and replaced with something shiny and new that had no room for ghosts like him. A profound, aching sadness settled over him, heavier than his backpack, colder than the wind. It was the feeling of being left behind, solidified in brick and mortar. He continued his walk. The image of the derelict hall burned into his mind. He ate his meal at the shelter in silence, the thin soup doing little to warm the chill that now came from within. As he was leaving, a man he recognized from the streets, a wiry guy named Kevin, pressed something into his hand. "Found an extra one, man," Kevin mumbled, avoiding eye contact. It was a dollar bill, wrinkled and soft as cloth. In their world, it was a fortune, an act of profound generosity. Sam tried to refuse, but Kevin was already shuffling away. "Pay it forward," he called over his shoulder. Sam stood on the street corner, the dollar bill clutched in his fist. It felt heavy with meaning. Pay it forward. A simple phrase that held the weight of a sacred duty. His gaze fell upon the blinking lights of a convenience store across the street. Lotto jackpot, $227 million, a garish sign proclaimed. He had never played. It was a fool's tax, a game for people who still had enough hope to waste $1 on a dream. He didn't have dreams anymore. He had memories, and they were all nightmares. Yet something propelled him forward. Maybe it was the image of the vet's hall. Maybe it was the simple human kindness of Kevin's gesture. Or maybe it was just the sheer crushing weight of rock bottom. When you have nothing left to lose, a 1 in 100 million chance doesn't seem so absurd. He walked into the store, the automatic bell announcing his presence. The clerk, a young man absorbed in his phone, barely looked up. Sam felt the familiar sting of invisibility, of being seen not as a person but as a problem, a smell, a potential threat. He walked to the counter, his heart thumping a nervous rhythm against his ribs. "1 ticket," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. He pushed the crumpled dollar across the counter. He let the machine pick the numbers. Quick pick. A random assortment of digits spit out on a flimsy slip of paper. He didn't look at them. What was the point? He folded the ticket carefully, tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket, the one with the fewest holes, and walked out. The entire transaction took less than a minute. Back on the street, a wave of self-loathing washed over him. He'd spent Kevin's kindness on a fantasy. He was a fool, a pathetic, homeless fool with a worthless piece of paper in his pocket. 2 days passed. The ticket was forgotten, buried under the more pressing concerns of survival. A snowstorm had blanketed the city, and Sam had found refuge in the hushed, warm halls of the Central Public Library. He wasn't there to read, but to simply exist in a place where the cold couldn't reach him. He sat at a carrel in the back, nursing a lukewarm cup of water, pretending to read a discarded newspaper someone had left on a table. He scanned the headlines without interest, his eyes glazing over stories of politics and distant wars. Then his gaze snagged on a small box on the 3rd page. Last night's winning lottery numbers. Curiosity, a long-dormant emotion, stirred within him. With a sense of weary obligation, more to honor Kevin's dollar than anything else, his hand moved to his inner pocket. His fingers, numb and clumsy from the cold, fumbled before closing around the small, folded slip of paper. He unfolded it on the table, its creases like a map of his foolishness. His eyes moved from the newspaper to the ticket, then back again. The first number matched. 04. A coincidence. The second matched. 17. His heart gave a strange little flutter. The third. 23. The air in his lungs seemed to solidify. He blinked, rubbing his eyes. The print in the newspaper was blurry. He must be mistaken. The fourth number. 38. A low hum started in his ears, blocking out the quiet rustle of pages and the distant coughs of other library patrons. The fifth. 44. The world began to tilt. The letters on the newspaper page swam before his eyes. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. He forced his gaze to the final number, the Powerball. The newspaper said 12. He stared at the ticket, his breath caught in his throat. 12. It was there. All of them. They were all there. The numbers stared back at him. A silent, impossible truth. He checked them again. And again. He traced each digit with a trembling finger, as if to confirm its physical existence. 04, 17, 23, 38, 44, and the red Powerball, 12. It wasn't a mistake. The humming in his ears grew into a roar. The library, the city, the entire world dissolved into a meaningless blur. There was only the table, the newspaper, and the small, flimsy piece of paper in his hand. That piece of paper was no longer a symbol of his foolishness. It was a key, a bomb, an earthquake, $227 million. The number was so vast, so abstract, it had no meaning. He couldn't feel joy or excitement. What he felt was a profound, terrifying vertigo, the feeling of a man standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath his feet. He, Samuel Jones, a ghost who haunted the city's alleyways, was now one of the richest men in the country. He lowered his head into his hands, not in prayer or celebration, but to keep the world from spinning apart. And in the silent, echoing space of his own mind, a single, terrifying question began to form. What now? For 3 days, the winning ticket was a shard of ice in Sam's pocket, a secret that both burned and froze him. The staggering number, $227 million, was a foreign language he couldn't comprehend. He slept with one hand clutching his jacket, his ingrained hypervigilance now focused on this fragile slip of paper. Every approaching shadow was a threat, every friendly face a potential predator who could somehow see the impossible truth branded on his soul. The world had not changed. He was still cold, still hungry, still invisible. But now, he was a king disguised as a pauper, a ghost guarding a dragon's hoard, and the psychological weight of it was heavier than poverty had ever been. He knew he couldn't stay in the shadows forever. The secret was too big, too volatile. It would either save him or consume him. His first concrete step was the hardest. He walked for miles, bypassing the gleaming, intimidating banks downtown, until he found a small, unassuming building with a sign that read, Veterans Legal Aid Society. He stood outside for an hour, wrestling with a lifetime of distrust and the soldier's instinct to handle his own problems. Finally, summoning a courage he hadn't felt since his last tour, he pushed open the door. The woman at the front desk directed him to a small, cluttered office. A lawyer named Maria Sanchez looked up from a stack of paperwork, her expression patient and weary, the look of someone who fought impossible battles for a living. Sam didn't know how to begin. He sat across from her, a disheveled man clutching a secret, and simply said, "I need help. I think I have a problem." Maria listened, her gaze never wavering. She had heard countless stories of despair, evictions, denied benefits, broken promises. Sam's story, however, was different. He haltingly explained his situation, his voice barely a whisper, before finally, with a trembling hand, sliding the lottery ticket across the desk. Maria picked it up. Her professional composure dissolved for a single, fleeting moment as her eyes widened. She checked the numbers online, then checked them again. The silence in the small office was absolute. She looked at Sam, truly looked at him, and saw not a homeless man, but a person on the verge of an immense, life-altering cataclysm. "Okay, Sergeant Jones," she said, her voice calm and grounding, using his old title with an instinctual respect that nearly brought him to tears. "It looks like you don't have a problem. You have a new mission, and my job is to make sure you have the right equipment to handle it." Maria became his anchor in the whirlwind that followed. She guided him through the labyrinthine process of claiming his prize. She protected him from the nascent media storm, helping him establish a blind trust to maintain his anonymity. She was the buffer between his fragile, traumatized self and a world that would have torn him apart for his story. While the legal machinery ground away, Sam began the slow, painful process of rejoining society. His first purchase with an advance arranged by Maria wasn't a car or a mansion. It was a simple, clean room in a modest, extended-stay hotel. The first night he stood under the hot spray of the shower for a full hour, washing away not just the grime of the streets, but the layers of hopelessness that had caked his spirit. He slept in a real bed for the first time in years, but sleep didn't come easy. The silence was too loud, the comfort too alien. With a legal ID and a bank account, Samuel Jones was reborn on paper, but the man himself was still lost. He'd walk through the city, now in new, simple clothes, and feel a profound sense of dislocation. He saw his old life everywhere, the faces of the forgotten on street corners, the steam grates that offered meager warmth. He was separated from them now by a wall of money so high he could no longer see them, and the guilt was a physical ache. One evening, staring at his reflection in the window of a fancy restaurant, he saw the same haunted stranger. The clothes were different, but the storm in his eyes remained. He knew then that the money had no power to fix what was truly broken. It could only provide the tools. The real work was his to do alone. His purpose crystallized the day the first wire transfer cleared. The number in his bank account was nonsensical, a string of zeros that felt like a typo, but it was real, and he knew exactly where his first real battle would be. The next morning he walked back to that derelict corner and stared at the Veterans Community Hall. This was it. This was the mission. It wasn't about charity. It was about reclaiming sacred ground. With Maria's help, he found the name of the CEO of Oakfield Development Group, a man named Richard Davenport. The first meeting took place in a sterile, glass-walled boardroom high above the city. Sam wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans. He was flanked by Maria, who carried a leather briefcase filled with legal documents. Davenport and his team of sharp-suited executives saw a curiosity, a novelty. They were polite but condescending, making a token offer to name a small park bench in their new luxury condo complex after the veterans. "I'm not here for a bench, Mr. Davenport," Sam said, his voice steady. "I'm here to buy the building." A ripple of amused disbelief went through the room. Davenport smiled thinly. "That property is the cornerstone of a $300 million development project. It's not for sale." "Everything is for sale," Sam countered, the quiet authority in his voice surprising even himself. He slid a piece of paper across the vast mahogany table. It was an offer, drafted by Maria's firm, for twice the assessed market value of the property. Davenport's smile vanished. He saw that this wasn't a joke. For weeks, a silent war was waged. Oakfield refused to sell, confident they could simply wait him out. They saw him as a fool with more money than sense, a man who would soon get bored and move on to buying yachts and sports cars. They underestimated him. They didn't understand that for Sam, this wasn't business. It was a rescue operation. When it became clear Davenport wouldn't budge, Maria suggested a new tactic. "Your story is your most powerful weapon, Sam," she advised. "The title of your trust, the Last Coin Foundation, is a good start, but now people need to know the man behind it." So they went to one journalist, a trusted local reporter known for her integrity. Sam told his story, all of it. The service, the ghosts, the streets, the last dollar from a fellow homeless man, and his quest to save the Vets Hall. The story exploded. The headline that had once been just a title became a reality across the nation. Rejected and homeless. Veteran buys lotto ticket with his last coin. Vows to use winnings to save Vets Hall from luxury developers. Public opinion turned into a tidal wave against the Oakfield Development Group. Protests led by local veteran groups formed outside their headquarters. The company's stock took a hit. Davenport, the ruthless businessman, suddenly found himself cast as the villain in a story of David versus Goliath. The pressure was immense and unrelenting. Defeated, he finally agreed to sell. The day Sam signed the final papers was quiet and overcast, the sky the color of slate. There was no grand celebration. He took the keys from Maria, his hand steady, and walked to the building. He stood on the cracked pavement, the same spot where he had stood weeks earlier as a ghost. He slipped the new, shiny key into the old, rusted lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy clunk. He pushed the door open, stepping into the cavernous, dusty space. Beams of gray light cut through the gloom, illuminating dancing dust motes. The air was thick with the smell of decay and forgotten memories. But to Sam, it was the most beautiful place on earth. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. He walked to the center of the large, empty room and turned in a slow circle. He pictured it not as it was, but as it would be. Clean beds upstairs, a warm kitchen serving hot meals, offices for therapists and job counselors, a main hall filled with the sounds of laughter and the aroma of coffee, a place where no soldier would ever have to feel alone again. A noise at the door made him turn. It was Kevin, the man who had given him the $1, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. Sam had spent a week searching for him. Behind him stood a handful of other men from the streets, their expressions hesitant but hopeful. Sam smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time in a decade, chasing the storm from their depths. "Welcome home," he said, his voice echoing in the vast, empty hall. "We have a lot of work to do." Sam Jones's true luck wasn't found in the winning ticket, but in the chance to find a new purpose. This story teaches that while material wealth can mend broken walls, only community and a mission can heal a broken soul. The greatest jackpot wasn't the money he won, but the rediscovery of his identity as a soldier, not as a warrior on a foreign battlefield, but as a guardian for his brothers and sisters at home. If you believe in the power of second chances, please leave a like and subscribe for more stories like this one.